Right, let's get straight back into it, shall we? Right, number 3, the Rocinante versus the Pella. Oh yeah. About halfway through the book, after a single Fred chapter, we get the moment we've been waiting for. Holden versus Marco, the Rocinante versus the Pella. Or should I say, the Rossi versus the Pella and 2 others. Because bullies travel in packs, we all know that. Now, this is the kind of writing that I love, okay? The kind that gives you the moments you want to see, but delivers them in an unexpected way. And I didn't expect this battle this early in the book. The battle lasts 3 chapters, with another chapter from Fred's POV acting as a prelude and 2 more chapters after that to deal with the aftermath. In Fred's chapter, we get an insight into the tired mind and body of the Belt's original de facto leader. He hasn't slept in over 30 hours, popping pills to keep him going, and is facing another shift. He is aware that he is pushing himself too hard, but knows no one else will do it. No help was coming. The weight of the safety of the whole of series rests on his shoulders. He meets with Holden, who asks him how this all ends, and Fred answers honestly, he doesn't know. He doesn't even know if it will end. He has dedicated his life to the fight, and for one side and the other, and will continue to do what he can because he doesn't know what else to do. We then switch to Philip's perspective. Marco has hidden his wolves, as he calls them, the Pella, the Koto, and the Shinsakuto, Kuto, in the dark of the void. Marco has been sitting in his crash couch the whole time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at his enemies. It finally arrives when they see the Rocinante is on its way from Tycho Station, escorting Fred Johnson. Philip is summoned to the bridge and his father talks like a pompous earther. He claims all their patience and sacrifice is now paid off. This is just classic Inaros bullshit, smell it a mile away. He has sat around doing nothing and then claimed chance as his own device. He gestures to the map and Philip sees a single ship Tycho bound and knows it's Fred. His father tells him to look closer and Philip is overcome with emotion when he sees the drive signature. Marco tells Carol to head to engineering and gives Philip the gunner's chair. Not only is Marco putting his son in immediate danger, but he is also putting him at the helm of the battle, giving him the sword of the Free Navy, and bids him swipe it at his own mother. What a twat. As soon as they are all strapped in, all 3 ships emerge from the darkness and begin closing in on the Rossi. The crew of the Rossi are on their toes, of course. They spot them immediately and start painting the Pella. Painting, of course, meaning targeting. So why didn't I just say targeting? Because I'm a fucking nerd, that's why, and I'm a cool nerd at that. The pack of wolves is loose now and gaining on the Rocinante, accelerating at such high speed that it's impossible to even speak, so Marco just sends his son a message. Fire at will. We then switch to Bobby's perspective. Now this is one of her best chapters ever, definitely like top 5. She's one of the best characters in the whole series, but this was to me when she becomes legendary, She's in the gunner seat next to Alex and she's already counting incoming torpedoes. All 3 enemy ships are converging on them from different angles. They are still millions of clicks away, but the Rossi is coming up toward the halfway point of their journey, and there they would have to make a hard choice basically. Either they flip and brake toward Tycho, or they would let the chase go on indefinitely, the winner being the last ship to run out of ammunition and reaction mass. The Wolves are just over an hour away, and Fred Johnson is making calls back to Ceres, requesting some long-range torpedo support. Despite being swallowed by the crash couch, her pumped full of shitty drug-juiced blood pooling in the back of her skull, her gut filled with fear and anxiety, excitement and desperation to stay focused, Bobby is in her element in these moments, the calmer moments just before the storm hits, and feels an overwhelming sense of belonging. If this is where she dies, this is how she wants to go out. Another 6 fast movers are added to the 10 already on their way. Bobby is all over it. Fred gets confirmation from Ceres, and then the Shinsakuto starts its flip and burn, breaking off from the other 2 wolves to intercept Ceres' attack. Alex and Bobby have always had a good relationship, but I feel this is the moment where their bond is sealed for life. Alex punches the Rossi forward from a 3 to 8G burn. The enemy torpedoes are in range now, and Bobby starts chewing through them with PDC fire. I know it's quite the cliche for the main team of characters in a story to be the best at everything, but they ain't no Mary Sue's. Alex Campbell really is a hell of a pilot, and Bobby is equal as gunner. Bobby fires a load of torpedoes with the hope that one that makes it through the space between the ships so that their PDCs stop firing automatically as to not shoot each other, and then the torpedo can do some damage between them. Unfortunately it doesn't work, but it was a great attempt to throw the wolves off. It buys them a few moments though, and they use this time to flip the Rossi and fire a railgun round off mid-spin before the Epstein drive blasts them off again. Fucking awesome, what an awesome move. The round hits the Koto and they drop core. The Pella doesn't break off to help it, but continues its pursuit, now aware of Bobby's railgun tactic. The battle was now simplified, which makes it longer and worse. It was now a race to see who ran out of ammo first, essentially. Bobby sends Holden a message to distract them. The start of Holden's chapter takes place simultaneously as the back end of Bobby's, so I'm going to switch between them a little bit. He receives the message to distract the Pella. He is first unsure how, feeling useless, reflecting how the ship is already doing its best, spraying radio chatter at the Pella, the comms laser throwing as much light into the Pella's sensors as it can, which gives him an idea. He opens up a tight beam connection request to the Pella. To his and everyone else's surprise, the Pella answers and Holden finds himself face to face on a monitor, mind you, with Marco Inaros, the man who broke Earth, who tried to capture Naomi and kill him. They don't say anything, they just look at each other. Thrust has made it hard to tell what emotions Marco is displaying. Holden thinks he sees a sneer or confusion. He is certain of the maliciousness in his eyes, though. The image of Marco switches to a younger, darker face, and Jim recognizes Philip. Why Marco is showing him Philip, he is unsure. It could simply be a masculine boast, reminding Jim that he fucked Naomi first, or maybe to show him that the son is filled with as much hate as the father. Holden is fascinated by how much of Naomi he sees in her son's face. He hadn't even left Earth when he was Philip's age. Switching back to Bobby, she is trying desperately to find the opening she needs, a way to win. The one tiny slip-up the Pella could make that she could take advantage of. She can't let her team down again. She could try the railgun tactic again, but the Pella was aware of this and had already dodged it twice before. But how did it dodge it? She flicks through the battle log and then fires again. Float, spin, fire, thrust. The Pella dodges once more, the same dodging maneuver every time. That was a pattern, and patterns were gaps in armour, a gap she could pierce. When a PDC round is fired and doesn't hit its target, it shoots through space forever on the same vector as it was fired. She pulls up the firing speeds of each of her weapons and tries to solve the puzzle. She solves it. She enters a new firing solution and sends it over to Alex. The Rossi's PDCs shoot thousands of rounds off in all directions, almost randomly, enough to look like a misfire to anyone watching. Then three torpedoes are fired toward the Pella, the obvious danger. For minutes that seem elongated by fear and anticipation, Bobby sees her plan playing out so clearly that surely the Pella must see it too, but they don't. The torpedoes drive in towards the Pella's flank, distracting their PDC fire. The cloud of PDC rounds she fired minutes ago reach their desired position. Once more, the Rossi floats, flips, fires and thrusts. The Pella dodges the railgun round just as it had before, sidestepping away from the torpedo battle on its port side. And right into the oncoming path of the PDC rounds. Boom! Bobby for the win. Although she doesn't know exactly how many hits, the Pella is clearly fucked as it begins to turn around and tuck tail. The tight beam connection drops and Alex slows the Rossi down and gives everyone a nice well-deserved break. The crew of the Rossi begin hooting in celebration and relief. Holden watches as the Pella retreats and without much thought disarms the last wave of torpedoes heading towards it. Jim thinks he has titinus due to the ringing in his ears, but realises that it's the medical alarm. He looks around the ship as Bobby climbs down from the cockpit. Fred Johnson is having a stroke. Bobby picks him up, the weight of thrust making him near 200 pounds, and takes him to the medical bay via the lift. Holden and Naomi wait for the lift to come back up and take it down to join them. They walk into the medical bay to find Fred on the table and Bobby standing over him. The butcher of Anderson Station has succumbed to old age, high blood pressure, lack of sleep, the crappy drug juice and G-force of the long, arduous battle. The chapter ends with Amos and Clarissa respectively cleaning Johnson's body before sealing up the body bag and taking him away forever. Naomi and Holden reminisce about Fred, having never known a world in which Fred Johnson wasn't important, for good or bad. Fred's dead, baby. Peace out, you legend. Coming in at number 4, The Ballad of Avasarala. Christian Avasarala is one of the best characters in the whole series, and in Babylon's Ashes she gets 3 chapters spread nicely throughout the book. Once again, her role in the story is pivotal. The future of Earth is resting on the shoulders of an old lady, and yet somehow she puts Atlas in his place. Her first chapter is the 10th of the book, and it begins with her getting dressed in one of her gorgeous saris as she records a message for her husband Arjun, who has still not been heard of and can only be presumed to have died when the rocks were dropped on Earth. Yet Chrissy will not accept it until she knows for sure. God knows how many messages she has already recorded, but in this chapter she finally slips up and refers to her husband in the past tense. My eyes went blurry when I first read this, and they still do it now when I read it now. They still do when I read it now. Her farewell to the end of the message particularly hits home when she tells him she has to go and put on the mask now, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was the expression coined by Arjun regarding the personality she uses at work, her political personality. After she readjusts her makeup, she calls her assistant Saeed and begins her day. Her relationship with Saeed is quite amusing through the chapters. She treats him like shit and he just kind of takes it. She first meets with Gorman Lee, a scientist who was promoted way above his level of preparation when the rocks dropped. Christian has had him working on finding a pattern for the gate-eaten ships, as well as anything he could learn about Laconia and why Duarte went there. Avasarala's filthy language has not gotten any better post-Free Navy. I love it. When Lee tells her Mars won't even admit that Duarte went through the Laconia gate, she says they are keeping their legs closed after they've already been fucked. Her next meeting is with the Martian Prime Minister Smith, and she reflects that she is lucky compared to him, as almost everyone thinks he's no more than an incompetent buffoon that let the MCRN be sold to pirates and terrorists. She keeps pressing him for the information Lee has failed to get, and he changes the subject every time. He confesses to her that by the end of the day he will be out the door and replaced by most likely Emily Richards. This is a setback for Christian, as she knows and can work with Smith and doesn't know if she will have the same rapport with the new girl. So she convinces him to give her all the information she can before the end of the day, and if he gets in trouble for it, you know, she can give him asylum. Avasarala is a politician to be reckoned with, man. Pre A Song of Ice and Fire, I was never into politics in fiction or reality, but definitely in fiction. As a youngling, I could never get into Star Trek, and the backdrop of the Star Wars prequels went right over my head. But now, depending on the writer/character, I can really get into the political side of stuff. It's really interesting to me now. And Avasarala makes this shit entertaining as hell. Next, she meets with the Strategy and Response Committee and is surrounded by people who she wouldn't have chosen but will have to make do with. Discuss the state of the system, and Chrissy is relieved to know her navy is now unpinned thanks to the Rocinante, and that the data logs from the Azure Dragon hint at a meeting of the Free Navy's top brass on Ceres. While the others discuss ideas, Avasarala shifts through the factors and possibilities presenting themselves. Medina's new fortifications, Rhea declaring itself against the Free Navy, the food and supplies of the neutral declared yet Free Navy-controlled Ganymede, the starvation and death of Earth, the Martian Navy divided between Duarte and his black market Free Navy, and Smith, now Richards. Fred Johnson's OPA and all the factions he couldn't influence or command, the colony ships being preyed on by Free Navy pirates, and the missing ships, and the stolen protomolecule sample. She could blockade Pallas and try to cut off Marco's resupply capabilities. She could reinforce Tycho and Ganymede, or set up a protected zone for colony ships running dark to avoid the piracy. She has so many choices to make, and each one of them could bring the collapse of all that was left. But she decides, fuck it, if Marco and his captains are all in one place and her ships are now unpinned, let's take back Ceres. Avasarala's next chapter comes in at 29 in the book, just after the Rocinante's dogfight with the Pella. It begins with her meeting with Gorman Lee again. He is trying to explain the benefits of the modified yeast leaked from Ganymede, which we know is Praxidike's doing, but they have no idea. Christian tells him to cut through the bullshit and use it if it helps Luna and Earth essentially grow food faster, and if it makes things worse, he can blame it on her. During the conversation, Chrissy is reminded how young and unprepared Gorman really is and can't tell whether she wants to snap at him or hug him. She leaves the meeting and gets in her carts to be taken across Luna. She reflects on how she used to be better at handling people, her edges hardened by the attack on Earth. She should have comforted or encouraged Gorman, not put him down. She makes a call on her hand terminal and Saeed asks for a report. There is a review waiting for her regarding Enceladus, but she already knows he is going to tell her that Marco fucked off before she got there, leaving them with more refugees to feed. Saeed reminds her that she also has a dinner with her daughter coming up, but Chrissy can't face being lectured by her own daughter right now. She tells him to cancel, but she sees he has something to say. She tells him to spit it out, and he reminds her that she is her daughter. Christian smiles at the first time he has ever pushed back at her, and thinks there is hope for the little fucker yet. She says fine and books of her dinner in 3 days' time. Christian goes silent for a while, contemplating the method she uses to push herself and how she hasn't meditated in a long time, and that gin and tonic and another hour of work is doing the trick nowadays. She's pulled out of her thoughts by Saeed, who tells her she has an urgent message from the Rocinante. She thinks it's from Fred, but it is actually Holden. She opens the message, and as soon as she sees Holden's face and hears his voice, she knows the news is death. He tells her everything she needs to know in the message. They've managed to fend off the Peller, and Fred Johnson died of a stroke. The meeting of the OPA leaders is still to take place on Tycho, and that he doesn't know what to do. After everything that had happened in the system and to Christian herself, Fred's death is what kicks off her mini breakdown. She doesn't know how to react emotionally, only that her emotions are reacting. She has lost her husband, her home, her world, and this is what brings all her defences down. She cancels everything and retreats to her room. She sits down and stays there, empty-minded, unsure. Eventually, there's a knock at the door and her least favourite granddaughter, Kiki, enters. Avasarala assumes her mother sent Kiki to lecture her, but really she is just worried. She comes over and lays her head in Christian's lap. She tells her grandmother that her mother Ashanti is hurt that she rescheduled, that she loves her and just doesn't know how to say it. Peace and quiet and the love of her family is all Christian needs to get over this frump, no doubt reminding her what she is fighting for. She tells Kiki that she will have dinner with them tonight and to go tell her mother and Saeed. Saeed is the one that let me in, Kiki says. And Christian is just like, he's a fucking busybody and he should stop putting his fingers in my shit. But this time, I'm glad he did. Lovely bit of banter there between grandmother and granddaughter. When Kiki leaves, Christian puts the mask on again and replies to Holden. She tells him she is sorry about Fred, but he needs to get his arse to Tycho and make this shit work. Avasarala's last chapter comes in at 38. It opens with her screaming in pain as she is doing leg weights, preparing herself for the gravitational pull for when she goes back down the well in a couple of weeks. The government is preparing to move from Luna back to the planet's surface. The shit she shouts at her personal trainer Pieter is hilarious. It reminds me of the 40-year-old virgin when Steve Carell is getting his chest waxed. She's just like, fuck your mother, nobody loves you, you prick. Brilliant. While she showers and gets dressed, she reflects on the current state of things. So it turns out the modified yeast has been doing its job and has increased the overall food supply. The rioting and racist cells on Earth are now under control, and the water recycling and reactors were up and running again. Things are looking better, but there's still a long way to go. The oceans are still choked and the dust and the dust and debris hasn't sunk yet, causing the death of light-eating plants and microbiota. After a call to Saeed to see what she planned for the afternoon, she makes her way to the most secure room in the solar system to meet with the Martian military attaché and Admiral Salfa. The main bloke she is meeting with is Rhodes Chen, who is sent in at PM Richards' place. Christian throws Chen off by asking about his wife by name. This is the kind of classic social manipulation Avasarala thrives on. She then asks for his staff to leave the room because she can't trust them. As they leave, Salfa checks for a bug in the room just in case, but gives Christy the all clear. Salfa pulls up a schematic of the system and points out Medina as their target. It's the choke point for the colony systems, and whoever has control of Medina and its defences controls the ring gates and the traffic that goes through them. It will reopen trade and resupply, as well as cut off Inaros' supply lines with Laconia. He points out that Inaros' method of strategic repeat has worked for him so far, but he wouldn't be able to do the same for Medina. Chen asks about the railguns, revealing that Mars knows about them. The railguns are the main defence of the ring space. Medina has some PDCs and torpedoes, but nothing in comparison to those railguns. Chrissy reveals her, or Holden's, or Fred's plan to Chen, an assault on Medina, which we'll get to soon. While that assault is happening, Chrissy plans for the consolidated fleet, Mars's, Earth's, OPA's and Meteopar's fleet combined, to run a distraction campaign against Marco's forces and stations in order to give the Rossi as much time as they need. It will be the largest and most aggressive fleet action in history, and they plan to kick Marco's balls right up into his throat. And this brings us to the end of Christian Avasarala's last chapter of Babylon's Ashes, and well, ever, unfortunately. All 3 chapters were as much a pleasure to read as her chapters in Caliban's War. The writers have really struck gold with this character. She is a lovable, foul-mouthed social and political genius, and casting Shora Agardashlu as Chrissy in the show was imperative to the show's success, I believe. I mean, all the casting is, to be honest, it's so good. But she's right up there in the top 3 at least. Like, yeah, she isn't like as old and granny-like as her book counterpart, but it's irrelevant in the end because she nails everything else the character has to offer. Number 5, the Battle of Medina. You hear that drilling? It's so fucking annoying. Right, so as I said, the Battle of Medina Station is the Consolidated Fleet's last-ditch effort to take out the railguns attached to the ring station. This is the climax battle of the book and takes place over 4 chapters, with a slight prelude at the end of Naomi's chapter in which 2 Free Navy fast attack ships from Ganymede start burning towards the Rossi. The Ostman Jasinski faction of OPA crewed ice hauler, the Giambattista, has been packed with 4,000 small reactorless ships, breaching pods, prospecting skiffs, etc., and escorted by the Rocinante assault Medina. The idea is that these 4,000 empty shuttles will distract the railguns so that a ship full of soldiers, including Bobby and Amos, will be able to land on the ring station and take control. We start with Holden's POV as the 2 fast attack ships close in. After firing their torpedoes, they practically vanish into the black due to their own rush to reach the Rossi and Giambattista before they enter the ring gate. The Rossi's PDCs deal with the torpedoes, but both ships take minimal damage from the debris. Now out of danger, the assault begins. The Giambattista opens its cargo doors, and like spores thrown into the wind, thousands of ships starts pouring out. Bobby calls Holden and asks permission to deploy with the second wave. Holden watches as they all start burning toward and through the ring gate, kindly asking Bobby to not die. We switch to the last of the Belter tech characters, Roberts. She and her colleagues have been anticipating the battle to come and are watching results on screen. They all hold their breath when the fast attack ship's torpedoes explode, yet the Rossi remains intact. They are shocked and fearful when thousands of tiny stars start burning towards them, like a wasp hive emptying for war. The first wave of shuttles is joined by a load of torpedoes for cannon fodder. The railguns start opening up on the shuttles. Salis remarks that he wished the railguns wouldn't fire into the nothingness between the gates, as what happens in that dark space is still a mystery. Vanderkaus is the first, at least in the group, to realise that the shuttles are burning too fast to have anyone inside, even if they had juice. The shuttles are close enough now that Medina Station's own defences have started firing. Medina starts taking hits from debris, but nothing serious. Belters cheer when one of the shuttles kills a few of its own around it from its own explosion. The thousands of ships have been reduced to a few hundred now and still declining. A lot of them are diving for Medina as to avoid the railgun fire. Roberts, Salis and the crowd are still smiling and cheering, believing themselves on the cusp of victory, but Vanderkaus remains quiet and uncertain. During the battle, a load of the shuttles appear to malfunction, their engines dying, leaving them drifting off away from Medina. The railguns have left these alone due to the thousands of incoming ships. Vanderkaus keeps an eye on them until he says shit and hands his terminal over to Roberts to see what is happening. One of the malfunctioning shuttles that was drifting suddenly erupts into life and dives toward the ring station. Robert starts to panic and shake and makes connection requests to Jakulski. He answers with a smile, out on the float and unaware of the situation. Roberts tells him to tight beam Montomayor and Duarte's people and warn them. They were never after Medina, they were after the railguns. We then switch to Bobby Draper aboard the shuttle with Amos and her squad of OPA belters. The shuttle is tumbling hard and they are being pumped full of anti-nausea meds, and Bobby feels right at home. They are 3 minutes away from the surface of the ring station. Holden asks if the troops are ready, so Bobby adds them to the chat and asks, "Hey, you assholes ready to do this?" And they all cheer and whoop. Holden informs her that the fast attack ships are on their way back. Just before they reach the railguns, Bobby sees on the external camera a small grey structure on the surface of the ring station, a design she knows in and out. They all check their weapons, including Bobby in her Martian power armor. The boat hits the station hard, bouncing and sliding across it. Bobby undoes her straps and blows the exit door off its hinges before it even stops. Badass. She orders her men to spread out due to the lack of cover. She hopes that the Martian soldiers didn't see them land, but we know Roberts will have warned them by now. So when enemy fire starts whizzing by their heads, we know the message got through. They too are in Martian light armor and ready for them. Bobby orders her men to fall back, the curve of the station the only cover she can rely on. When they are far enough away, she floats a few meters up in the air until the top of wall of cover from the railguns bands that the Martian enemies are using too is just above the curve of the station. She sees a target pop its head out and she shoots it, not knowing whether she hit it or not. Amos follows her lead and then so do the rest. Unsure what to do next, she calls Holden, who informs her the fast attack ships are 2 hours away. She needs some air support, but the Rossi can't help and the few shuttles still alive would be chewed to kibble before reaching her. Amos waves to her and points forward and she opens a connection. He asks her about the power source of the railguns, pointing out that they've been firing non-stop and would need a tremendous amount of energy to drive them and even more to cool them off. They have to have a reactor somewhere. Bobby doesn't hesitate. She tells her men to stay put and hold them off while she gets back into the boat they landed in and takes off. The Martians fire at her, but even a tin can like this is unaffected by mere bullets. Mere bullets! It hurts a little to leave her men behind, but she has no choice. She has to stay low enough to the ring station that the railguns still can't aim at her. She scans the stations for radiating heat, and the railgun facing Sol system is the hottest. I swear, every book Bobby is central in, she always does something as ridiculously awesome as what she does next. She sets the course of the boat towards the railgun, and as it begins its kamikaze dive, she undoes her straps and jumps out of the airlock. The plume of a real drive would have killed her, but her Martian armor is enough to protect her from the small shuttles. Her temperature alarms all ring at once, and her faceplate goes black and opaque. For a brief second, she's floating blind above the station. When her vision returns, she sees the small Martian bunker and launches the missile from her back at it, Boba Fett style. She smashes down onto the surface. There's a bright flash from the rocket, and then an even bigger one from the boat hitting the reactor. Her faceplate goes opaque again, but this time a mottled brown. Panics when a gust of wind rushes past her, pushing her off the surface. The ring station changes from blue to an angry acid green and eventually back to blue, then strobes to white to black and then green again. The huge bands keeping the railguns together untighten from the station's surface like a wedding ring a size too big for the finger. She calls Amos and asks for an update. He confirms that her plan worked, fucking up the enemy's shit in all the right ways. The railguns have been rendered inoperable. The Martian soldiers are making a push towards Amos and the OPA. Holden asks for a report and Bobby requests that he get his ass in here and give them some air support. They may not control the railguns, but at least no one else does. Both of Bobby's chapters in Babylon's Ashes are two of her best and definitely most badass. She is just an absolute tank of a woman and worthy of following into hell. We switch back to Holden for cleanup as the battle comes to an end. The Rossi and the Giambattista both make it through the ring gate. The fast attack ships pursuing them are close and start firing at them in an attempt at a Hail Mary. The Rossi is ready with a targeting solution, but Holden wants to give the ships a chance to surrender. He broadcasts a message to them. Once inside the slow zone, the Giambattista opens its doors again and more ships, filled with teams of OPA soldiers, start heading towards Medina to finish the job. The first fast attack ship doesn't heed Holden's warning, and as soon as it enters the ring space and starts shooting, Alex fires the railgun right through it. Holden can't feel a sense of victory as he watches the cloud that was once a ship full of men and women turn into dust. Bobby chimes in from the ring station and reports that the battle is over and they have taken the rest of the living Martian team alive. When Holden finds out the team was Duarte's Martians and not Free Navy, he bids her keep them safe and treated well. Jim broadcasts to Medina Station asking for their surrender. In classic Jim fashion, he omits radical honesty, saying, "We have guns, you have guns, we could shoot each other some more, or you could surrender peacefully and Free Navy prisoners will receive humane treatment." After a few minutes, Holden receives an open broadcast from Medina's Captain Samuels. She surrenders to him under the condition that he keep his word that her people won't be hurt and treated humanely. She makes a big deal of it and even salutes him before ending the message. We get another classic Holden moment when he replies with, "Sounds good, we'll be right over." 20 hours later and Medina has been secured. Holden and his crew are watching Avasarala on the newsfeed, answering reporters' questions. Bobby remarks that Chrissy shouldn't be milking the victory too much, as when they lose Medina again it will be even worse. Holden asks why she thinks they will lose it. Bobby explains to him that Inaros and all the fleet he could get his hands on are burning hard for them, and there's nothing they can do but die holding them off long enough for the consolidated fleet to arrive before they put the railguns back together, and that's only if Duarte hasn't already sent his own forces to attack from the Laconia gate. She says she says they have all been dead since she took out the railguns, but at least it's a fine hill to die on. Number 6, from Inaros to Nagata. Now, I'm sorry to be such a tease, but this has ended up being a pretty big section, so I've decided to take it out and do it as its own separate video, and that will be the first of my Expanse content after this series. For now, I will just say that I didn't like Philip's chapters too much at first. For some reason, I thought he had too many, but he only has 7. And looking back, his story arc and his chapters are the best in the whole book, and I do really, really want to talk about him. But you're going to have to wait, Koyos. Number 7, Bye Bye Marco. Coming in next is the death of Marco Fuckface Inaros. Now, Marco's death does 3 things. First, it kills off the main asshole villain of the last 2 books in an awesome, terrifying way. 2, it shows us just how amazing Naomi is, as 3, she is the one that figures out why the ships are being eaten and how to avoid it, which is a vital and necessary factor in order for the ring gates to be used safely. And of course it had to be Naomi who ends his short reign of terror, his Age of Ultron, because, I mean, other than maybe Philip, I can't think of a single character better suited to kill him, maybe Holden. Not that everyone in the galaxy doesn't deserve a pop at him anyway, the cocksucker. So after Marco finds out that the Rocinante is heading towards Medina, he pulls the rest of his fleet together, 15 ships, and burns harder than fuck for the ring. The crew of the Rossi are holed up in the security office of Medina. Naomi has been spending all of her time working on finding a pattern in the missing ships, going through data logs, traffic control, environmental reports, yada yada. Holden comes to her and they discuss the plans of holding the ring space, and even the best plan has terrible odds of success. They have no real way of defending against the nearing fleet. They could just up and run, but Naomi won't hear it. Marco is going to chase them wherever they go. There is no escaping him now. They talk for 6 pages straight, and it's just evidence of the fantastic writing, organic, meaningful, moving dialogue. It ends with them accepting that this is where they die, and Holden puts his head into his lover's lap and they weep. Holden, of course, blames himself for bringing death to his family, for relying on his virtues, his unshakable faith in humanity. Naomi can't begin to explain her feelings of guilt to him for bringing her family into Marco's orbit, and the certainty that if she had seen what he was in time, this all could have been avoided. She stays up all night going through all the data again, unaware of how much time has passed, until eventually she finds it. 5 variables of preceding energy, preceding mass, the energy and mass of the ship, and time. She starts shaking with excitement and nervousness and tells Holden the news. She needs to hear confirmation back from Luna, but she is quite sure she has found it. She starts pacing up and down and explains the pattern as best as she can to Jim. Essentially, the traffic passing through the gates leaves a wake behind, and any ship with enough mass and energy to hit that wake vanishes. The Free Navy fleet has already passed the halfway point and are on their breaking burn. Their plan is to pack the Giambattista full of weight and mass and send it through the Arcadia gate within minutes of Marco entering the Sol gate. At most, they will have a 10-minute window. The crew of the Rossi are hanging out in the ops deck with Alex and Bobby in the cockpit. It may be the last time they ever see each other, and they hold on to the moment. Naomi sheds a tear for her son, who she assumes is with the fleet hopefully about to vanish out of existence, and Clarissa comforts her. With less than 20 minutes until the fleet hits the gate, the crew straps in and prepares themselves. The Giambattista begins its burn. Naomi makes a joke, and she and Holden laugh together. He wants the moment to be over, and he wants it to last forever, if it is to be her last moment with her. His last moment with her, sorry. We then switch over to Marco's POV, and are instantly reminded of what a fucking asshole he is. The whole chapter is mostly his inner thoughts while his body takes a beating from the high G burn. He thinks about how once the battle is over, he will have to use Medina's resources and the already scarce stolen colony supplies to refuel his fleet for the burn back to Sol. So what if the colonies go hungry? It's wartime. He admits to himself some of his mistakes, but he doesn't take full responsibility. Instead, he uses them to fuel his whole method and mindset of improvise and adapt. He has no regrets of his actions, only that he should have done more damage. He should have thrown more rocks at Earth and even destroyed Mars while he was at it. He thinks himself and the belt as kings and the colony the colony worlds his subjects. He thinks about Philip missing the launch and isn't surprised. He believes the boy is merely acting up, unaware that he has finally accepted his mother's truth and seen Marco for the cunt he really is. He hopes that he can take the Rossi without destroying it, as trotting it out as part of his fleet would make him look good, and reflects that his inner circle missed what good leadership required: style. To have Marco die in his moments of peak fucking delusion and arrogance is undeniably cathartic. The last of the Free Navy fleet reaches the ring, and as they enter, the unknown aggressors do their thing. And I'm just going to read it to you now, because it's just, there's no way I can explain it better than how it's written. Something was wrong with his monitor. He thought at first that the image had gotten grainy, the resolution rougher, but that wasn't right. It was the same size, only he could see the parts that made it up. He wasn't looking at the Rocinante, he was looking at photons streaming off a sheet of electrically excited plastic. The polymer chains glowed dark and light and dark. It was like seeing a woman's body in painting across the room, and then without warning, only the brushstrokes that made it up. Naomi was nowhere in it. He shouted and could sense the pressure waves going out of his throat. The clouds of molecules that made his fingers slapped against the ones that were the control pad. He meant to type that they should fire, that they should kill while the chance was still with them. But he couldn't make out the letters in the splash of photons that spilled off his screen. There was just too much detail. Where the air began and the crash couch ended was lost. The boundary between his body and the environment blurred. He had known since he was too young to remember, learning that atoms were made from more space than material, and that at the lowest levels the things that made atoms could bounce in and out of being. He'd never seen it before. He'd never been so aware that he was a vapor of energy, a vibration in a guitar string that didn't exist. Something dark and sudden moved through the cloud toward him. The last paragraph of the chapter switches to Holden's POV. The crew of the Rocinante watch as the lights from the drives of the incoming fleet grow brighter and then flicker and die. All 15 warships vanish out of existence in the blink of an eye. Number 8. A New World. 6 months later, Michio Parr arrives on Ceres with her husband Joseph. Nadia, Bertold and Laura have remained behind on their new home. They attend a dinner party of all the important people left in the system. It has taken 6 months to soothe any violent resistance and anger across the system and to get them all together. It's a real cocktail party, the kind where everyone stands around drinking flutes of champagne and remarking on the quality of the filet mignon. We learn that the shadow of Duarte hangs over everyone, especially Mars, who wants answers, but the only word from Laconia is a broadcasted message repeating that they are their own sovereign authority and that any ships that proceed through their gates will be denied passage. Earth has parked 2 of its best warships outside the Laconia gates, fitted with old railguns and nuclear torpedoes. Rosenfeld Guliang is the first to have been prosecuted for the murder of billions on Earth. Anderson Dawes has been captured and Nico Sandrani has turned himself in. Michio is the only former member of Marco's inner circle to be alive and free. Avasarala takes Michio by the arm and is overly nice, asking questions about her family and making jokes. Parr knows it is all an act, but it does make her at ease, especially as she knows she is going to have to ask this woman for amnesty. Parr apologises to her, a general and sincere apology, without detailing how she failed to stop the attack that killed Chrissy's husband and billions more, how she didn't see Marco for who he truly was earlier. Christian stops and looks her in the eye, and Parr sees a deepness in her face as if a mask was lifted, and Avasarala simply says, "Politics is the art of the possible, Captain Parr. When you play at our level, grudges cost lives. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die." Then Holden shows up, greets Michio, and then steps away to speak with Chrissy in private. Parr looks around and sees Naomi talking to former Prime Minister Smith and notes how unremarkable she looks, the woman who was the centre of Marco's obsession that he arguably got himself killed for pursuing. An hour later, the meeting begins. They are taken to a triangle-shaped room. Avasarala in one corner represents Earth, Emily Richards and her flocking advisors for Mars in the other, and lastly, Holden, Naomi, Carlos Walker and Michio herself for the belt. That perfectly sums up the 3 powers, if you ask me. The mismatch of creeds and ideological positions for the belt, the machine-like lack of a true leader behaviour of Mars, and then Avasarala's one true voice of Earth. She begins the meeting and beams a proposal to everyone's hand terminals. She states that they have a lot of problems that need solving and that Holden has a few ideas. Holden stands up and begins to talk about how the Free Navy wasn't wrong. The opening of the gates and habitable new worlds with their reserves of air and water has filled the economic niche once run by belters. Most of the belters would never survive down a gravity well and will eventually be forgotten and die. But now, thanks to Naomi's discovery, the slow zone needs to be trafficked properly in order to guarantee safe passage for all. Add that to the fact that both inner and belter infrastructure won't be able to save them, and that they're all going to need the resources of the new planets, and a fast, efficient way to do that. Holden outlines his proposal: an independent union with the sole and specific task of coordinating shipments through the gates. The entire population of the belt turned into a single transport company made up of a network of ships and support stations. With over 1,300 worlds to govern, there is going to be a lot of work for everyone. Michio watches as Avasarala begins to describe what attributes the leader of this union would need, and Holden smiles to himself and nods and looks super pleased with himself. And Michio begins to feel the doubt and disheartening of this anointment to disguise as a meeting, until Christian nominates Holden, and he jumps up in shock and refuses it outright immediately, calling it a terrible idea. He says that they need to stop enforcing rules and leadership on the belt like this and let them elect someone themselves. He points at Michio and nominates her. After all the tension, death, war, and brooding over what the future holds, we get a nice, relaxing and moving Naomi chapter before the epilogue. After the Spacing Guild meeting at Ceres Station, the crew of the Rocinante meet up in a bar to relax and reflect and wonder what comes next. After explaining why he nominated Parr, Clarissa asks what will happen to them now, and Holden, once again completely missing the real point of the question, tells them that we'll have a family vote on it, but they will almost definitely join the Union. Naomi is seemingly the only one to spot Clarissa's reaction and hands her a napkin to dab her eyes. What Clarissa was really asking, of course, was, now that the war is over, do I still have a place here? And Holden has told her yes. It's a really beautiful and amusing, subtly tender moment, and I fucking love it. Alex and Amos tell Peaches stories about Illis or New Terra, with Jim chiming in occasionally, but Bobby sits quiet. Naomi takes her hands and asks her what's up. Bobby is chewing over the idea that the Mars terraforming project, the one fundamental dream that kept Mars together and strong, the only thing in her life that has always just existed, is over. I mean, that's what makes Duarte so dangerous and powerful, right? His ability as a Martian to break away from the dream and create his own, unperturbed by nostalgia or morality. Unsure of the future, Naomi comforts her new family member, and then they hit the karaoke. The bar begins to fill as the night goes on. Naomi gets applauded for her singing, and even Clarissa gets up to have a go. Turns out she has a nice voice. Nice enough for some young Koyo to try and hit on her, but Bobby backs him off. They make their way back to the Rossi, tipsy and laughing as they go. Alex and Bobby mimic each other's accents. Back on the Rossi, they sit in the galley swapping stories. Even Clarissa tells a funny story from her time in prison. Naomi and Jim retire to their cabin and talk again about nominating Michio. Jim reveals his second choice was Naomi, that she has the brains and connections to do it, and despite not wanting it, would have taken it if she had to. Then Jim asks her how she is doing, as he had done for every few days since the war ended. She had killed her old lover, her old friends, and as far as she knows, her own son. She'll have to deal with that guilt and sadness for the rest of her life, but at least she was alive and her little family was too. Jim knows this, but he asks anyway to let her know that it matters to him. She starts to drift off until Jim asks her what they should do next. They could blaze a trail to the outer worlds, normalising it so the Belters would feel comfortable taking the risk. Duarte will no doubt eventually come back, and that's going to be a problem. This holds consistent with the continuing theme of I don't know what to do next found throughout the ending of the book. But Naomi merely shushes him by saying, let's just stay here for a minute. Finn, cut to black, curtains draw. And that's book 6 of The Expanse. Babylon's Ashes, in my mind, was supposed to be The Expanse's Dance with Dragons, and while it was damn close, they just didn't quite pull it off for me. Some of the fat needs trimming, and I'm sure the writers know that and learn from it, hence why in the next book they combined both formats, sticking with a handful of major POV characters like the first 5, but with a sprinkling of side characters like in 6. At first I did think that this book was actually my least favourite of the series, having preferred the simplicity, mystery and setting of Cybola Burn. At least I thought that when I did a quick ranking when I first finished Tiamat's Wrath earlier this year. But after going through it again, I just can't justify putting this book last, man. It's too fucking epic, even if it's for its own good. There's just so many great moments, and it concludes both the second trilogy and the era which the first 6 books were all set. And it's one of the big milestones of the series. And, you know, of course, it's just a fucking sick book, and I really enjoyed it when I read it again properly. And Cibola Burn, well, it's the only entry I would consider an anomaly in the series, as the rest follow on from each other really well, whereas book 4 feels quite stand apart. Anyway, I hope this video wasn't too much of a slog, and if it was, well, so is book 6 at some point, so at least on my first read. I've obviously gone into a lot more detail than I did for the first video, but still, I wish I could just go through the book and just list out every brilliant turn of phrase, every curse, every moment of sharp-tongued, witty humour from Avasarala, such as, "Forgive me, Holden can't find his cock with both hands unless someone points it out to him." Or every small, subtle moment of the growing friendship between Jim and Clarissa, like how her face lights up when he accepts the coffee she made him, and every one of Amos's amiable smiles and lack of emotional resonance, like when he gives Holden a cheerful thumbs up regarding the possible killing of Naomi's son, and all the other tiny moments that make this series such an excellent read. I just don't have the time, unfortunately. Read them yourself / reread them yourself. I apologise once again for taking so damn long with this video, and unfortunately I have to tell you, so will the next one, as over the coming 2 months I'll be directing and acting in a short film I've written, and obviously that is going to have to take precedence. But as soon as I'm done, I will carry on with this Expanse Ranked series, and then after / during that I'm planning on doing more Expanse content. Ideas for videos include basic stuff like character and event breakdowns, as well as comparisons to the show, which did what better, etc, etc. If you have any ideas, throw them my way. Ideally, I'd like to do theory videos, but to be honest, as expansive as the Expanse is, it's not a Song of Ice and Fire, you know. I feel like the only theories that would be worthwhile are like what the unknown aggressors are, what they want, and, you know, basically what's going to happen in the next book. And maybe I'll try that. Maybe I'll have a little discussion about that. If you have Instagram, please follow me at Ironically Sardonic. I use that to post updates on my film, behind the scenes footage, as well as memes and posts relevant to the Expanse and my channel. I've really enjoyed making these videos, so please do not despair, don't be forlorn. I'll be back sooner than you realise. Have a good day, guys. Like, subscribe, share, all the things, and remember your doors and corners, kids, because that's where they get you.